The mountainside broke loose with a roar and buried the valley road beneath stone, timber, and 3 loaded farm wagons before Edith Shaw could pull the station bell a second time. She ran toward the shattered embankment, skirts gathered in both hands, while stranded tenants dragged 2 injured drivers clear and the unpaid railway crew watched from the unfinished track above. One of those men swayed where he stood, too hungry to lift his shovel. Below him, baskets of summer fruit had already split open in the mud. Edith climbed onto a broken wagon wheel and looked past the landslide. The road had not merely narrowed. It was gone for nearly half a mile, swallowed beneath a moving wall of rock that still shed stones into the gorge. No wagon could cross it before the pears softened, the wheat mildewed, and the valley lost the only harvest capable of carrying its farms through winter. Then she saw contractor Silas Vane's foreman riding away from the railway camp with the payroll chest strapped behind his saddle. He was not riding toward the trapped wagons. He was taking the north trail out of the valley. That was when Edith understood the disaster had begun before the mountain fell. A tenant named Amos Reed climbed beside her, blood running from his temple. "Market train leaves in 8 days," he said. "Miss Shaw, we cannot move this crop." Edith turned toward the abandoned railway. The iron rails ended on the hill above the manor orchards, less than 2 miles from a working junction. Graded earth stretched beyond them, but no track had been laid across the late master's hunting ground. 50 railway laborers had been waiting 6 weeks for wages and 3 days for proper food. The contractor claimed the money had not arrived. The empty payroll chest, now disappearing over the ridge, said otherwise. One of the workers collapsed beside a stack of unused ties. Edith reached him first. He was a broad-shouldered rail setter named Daniel Pike. But hunger had hollowed his face until he looked older than his 40 years. She loosened his collar and pressed water to his lips. His hand closed around her wrist before he could drink. "Don't ask us to work for promises," he whispered. "Not again." "I won't," Edith said. She looked toward the stone building beside the abandoned station platform. Once, it had been the estate's lower kitchen, built to feed hunting parties and railway surveyors. Now its chimney leaned, its shutters hung crooked, and nettles crowded the door. Lord Nathaniel Harrow had given Edith permission to sleep there after the station dining room closed, as though an unusable kitchen were charity enough for a woman with nowhere else to go. But Edith Shaw had fed 300 passengers during a blizzard with 1 stove, for sacks of flour, and a timetable no one believed could hold. She knew the worth of a hot meal. She knew the worth of an honest account. And she knew hungry men could not be ordered into saving a valley by people who had already stolen from them. If you had stood on that ruined road, watching a year's labor rot beneath the sun, you might have believed the valley was finished. Edith did not. She saw 50 unpaid workers, an empty kitchen, tenant wagons full of food, and 2 miles of unfinished railway. What she did not yet know was whether the master would surrender his family's private ground, or send armed keepers to defend it. She rose and faced the railway crew. "No man lays 1 rail until he knows what he will be paid," she called. "No woman gives 1 basket until its value is written down. We will open the old kitchen, issue meal tokens against honest wages, and keep every account where all can see it." For a moment no one moved. Then a distant whistle rose from beyond the northern ridge. It was not the market train. It was Silas Vane's locomotive, coming back down the valley with armed guards riding the coal tender. The locomotive came around the northern bend, pushing black smoke over the unfinished grade. Edith helped Daniel Pike to his feet, then ordered 2 workers to carry him toward the old kitchen. No one reached for a tool. 50 hungry men stood beside the rails and watched Silas Vane return with 6 armed guards, a polished cane across his knees, and no payroll chest in sight. Vane climbed down before the engine fully stopped. He wore a dark coat too fine for railway work and boots that had never sunk into ballast. His gaze moved from the buried road to the wagons of stranded produce. and Edith saw a calculation settle over his face before concern could pretend to reach it. "Unfortunate business," he said. "Clear the camp. The railway contract is suspended until the road is restored." Amos Reed stepped forward. "That road will not be restored before market. Then the harvest waits." "The harvest spoils," Edith said. Vane looked at her, as if the abandoned kitchen had produced a voice of its own. "Miss Shaw, this matter belongs to men with contracts. The men with contracts have not been paid." Several guards shifted their rifles. Vane smiled without warmth. Company funds were delayed in the county office. Edith glanced at the empty leather straps behind the foreman's departing saddle marks. "Your foreman left carrying a payroll chest." "Tools," Vane replied. "Nothing more." Daniel sagged between the workers supporting him. Edith turned away from Vane before anger could waste time. "Get him inside. Bring every man too weak to stand. Amos, ask the tenants to move their sound produce under shade. Nothing enters my kitchen until its owner and value are written down." Vane tapped his cane against a rail. "That building belongs to Lord Harrow." "So does the mountain," Edith said. It did not ask his leave before falling. The kitchen door resisted until 3 men leaned against it. Rusted hinges screamed open, releasing the smell of damp stone, soot, and old animal nests. Edith stepped into darkness and found the room almost as she remembered it from the estate records. 2 iron ranges, a brick bread oven, a deep preparation table, a cracked slate floor, and shelves sagging beneath years of dust. A copper boiler stood near the rear wall. Beyond it, a narrow service door opened toward the railway yard. The place was neglected, but it was not useless. Edith pulled down the shutters. Light crossed the room in pale bars. Sweep the hearths. Test the chimney. Draw water from the pump before the landslide mud reaches the lower channel. A worker named Thomas Bell stared at the ruined stove. "There is no coal. There are broken ties beside the grating shed. Use only the split ones. The sound timber belongs under the rails." She found flour in a tenant wagon, onions from another, bruised apples, beans, salt pork, and 3 wheels of hard cheese meant for market. She refused every offering until Amos marked it in a ledger torn from the old station office. 1 bushel beans, Reed Farm. 2 sacks flour, Miller Tenants. 12 pounds salt pork, Valley Cooperative. Beside each entry, Edith wrote a value and the name of the person who had supplied it. Then she tore squares from a stack of unused baggage tags and stamped each one with the station mark. "These are meal tokens," she told the gathered tenants. "Every basket brought here earns credit. Every worker who takes a shift earns tokens against food. Now and wages later. No promise stands unless it is written twice, once in the labor book and once on the man's token." Thomas turned one of the tags in his hand. "Paper cannot fill a stomach." "No," Edith said, "but it can keep another man from stealing the meal." By noon, the first range was smoking. Edith boiled beans with onions and pork, baked flat loaves against the hot brick, and cut apples into the pot because sweetness made thin food feel less like punishment. Daniel sat near the stove wrapped in an old wool blanket she found inside a cedar chest. The blanket had belonged to Edith's husband, Samuel, when he served as station master on the Western Line. His brass timetable watch still lay beneath it. She held the watch for one quiet moment. Samuel had died during a winter derailment after refusing to send a passenger train across a bridge he believed unsafe. The company had called his caution insubordination until the bridge collapsed beneath an empty freight car the following morning. Edith had learned then that a correct warning meant little when powerful men controlled the written record. She closed the watch in her palm and returned it to the chest. Daniel noticed. "Your husband?" "Yes." "Railway man?" "An honest one." Daniel lowered his eyes toward the token beside his bowl. "Honest railway men usually finish poor." "Not today," she said. "Today they finish fed." The workers ate slowly at first, suspicious that a second serving might be denied. Edith placed the serving ladle in Thomas Bell's hand and made him count every bowl aloud. When the last man had eaten, she took her own portion standing beside the ledger. Outside, Silas Vane's guards remained near the locomotive, watching the kitchen as if food itself were an act of rebellion. By late afternoon, strength had begun returning to the crew. Daniel spread the original survey sheets across the preparation table. The planned railway curved around Lord Harrow's hunting preserve, adding nearly 6 miles before reaching the junction. That route could never be completed in 8 days. But a penciled line crossed directly through the preserve. Surveyor's first choice, Daniel said. 2 miles and a quarter. Mostly level ground. We could lay a freight spur in 7 days if the sleepers and spikes are released. Why was it rejected? Daniel pointed to a red notation bearing the estate seal. Lord Harrow's father refused passage. Said engines would scatter the deer and spoil the family shooting grounds. Amos looked toward the piled wagons outside. So our harvest rots to keep gentlemen from missing their birds. A spoon struck the slate floor. The room fell silent as Nathaniel Harrow entered through the service door. He was younger than Edith expected, perhaps 35, dressed in riding clothes stained by the climb over the blocked road. No guards followed him. He studied the workers seated at his family's old tables. The tenant produce stacked beneath labeled boards, and the railway survey stretched across the place where generations of Harrows had once carved venison. This kitchen was given to you for lodging, he said. Edith faced him. It is still my lodging. You have opened an unauthorized commissary. I have opened a ledger. Nathaniel's eyes moved over the accounts. Every contribution, meal, and labor promise stood plainly recorded. Nothing had been hidden. Daniel pushed the survey toward him. Give us access through the preserve. My lord, release the stored rails, and we can reach the junction before market day. Nathaniel did not touch the paper. Those grounds are entailed with the estate. So are the farms that will fail, Edith said. The contractor holds authority over construction. The contractor is leaving your workers hungry while his money rides out of the valley. Nathaniel looked towards Silas Vane's locomotive. For the first time, doubt entered his expression. Then an estate keeper hurried through the doorway carrying a sealed envelope. My lord, this was found nailed to the manor gate. Nathaniel broke the seal. His face hardened as he read. What does it say? Edith asked. He handed her the paper. By authority of contractor Silas Vane, all railway supplies, stored rails, spikes, sleepers, tools, and equipment would be removed from the valley at sunrise. Any worker interfering would be charged with theft. Any tenant exchanging food for unauthorized labor would forfeit future freight rights. At the bottom stood Nathaniel Harrow's own copied signature. He stared at it longer than anyone else. I never signed this. From outside came the clank of coupling chains. Vane's guards were already fastening the supply wagons to the locomotive. Edith folded the false order and placed it beside the open ledger. Then before sunrise, she said, we find out what else he signed in your name. Before dawn, Edith moved the kitchen ledger from the preparation table and nailed it to the wall beside the main door. Every worker could see what food had entered, who had supplied it, how many meals had been served, and how many hours of labor had been promised in return. Beside the ledger, she hung Silas Vane's false removal order with Nathaniel Harrow's copied signature exposed beneath the lamplight. Then she placed 2 empty account books below it. One for the railway, she said. One for the man who robbed it. Nathaniel remained near the stove, his riding coat still damp from crossing the ruined road. He had sent the estate keeper to search the manor office for every contract bearing Vane's name. Daniel Pike and Thomas Bell stood at the windows while the rest of the crew waited outside beside the coupled supply wagons. Beyond them, guards paced near the locomotive with rifles resting against their shoulders. Vane entered just as the first light touched the hills. He removed his hat with careful courtesy. Lord Harrow, I am pleased you have come to restore order. Nathaniel held out the false notice. You used my signature. A clerk copied it from an earlier authorization. A harmless convenience. You ordered my railway stores removed. Company property, my lord. Purchased with whose money? For the first time, Vane looked toward the open ledger. Edith saw his attention pause on the meal accounts, the names of tenants, and the labor tokens stacked beneath a stone weight. He understood at once what she had built. Not merely a kitchen, a record no single man controlled. The valley is frightened, Vane said. Miss Shaw is encouraging people to believe food and scraps of paper can replace lawful management. Edith came around the table. Food replaces hunger. Records replace lies. Vane smiled. A station cook's opinion. A station caterer's accounts, she replied. I balance freight meals, passenger provisions, fuel deliveries, and contractor invoices for 11 years. Your figures are clumsy. The room went still. Edith opened a packet Nathaniel's keeper had brought from the manor. Inside were monthly statements showing payments released for railway wages, coal, spikes, sleepers, and grading equipment. She placed them in a row beneath the false order. Then Daniel opened a crew book he had kept privately. The dates did not agree. According to the estate statements, workers had been paid every second Friday. According to Daniel's book, they had received only 3 partial payments in 4 months. According to Vane's supply invoices, 200 tons of rail had entered the valley. Fewer than 130 stood in the yard. Vane did not raise his voice. Private notes written by disgruntled laborers prove nothing. Then let us count what remains, Edith said. I will not permit company materials to be handled by unauthorized persons. Nathaniel stepped between Vane and the door. His manner was quieter than Edith's, but the choice in it was unmistakable. These materials are stored on my land under a contract funded partly by my estate. They will be counted. One of Vane's guards moved closer. Nathaniel did not step aside. Behind him, Edith reached for the iron key hanging from the old kitchen hook and locked the service gate leading to the supply wagons. No one under this roof loses his wages today, she said, and nothing leaves this yard until every rail, spike, and sack of coal is entered. Vane's gaze settled on her. You may find, Miss Shaw, that written promises are dangerous possessions. So are stolen ones. For 6 hours, workers and tenants counted supplies in teams of 3. One man counted aloud, another marked the railway book, and a tenant copied the same number into Edith's public ledger. Nathaniel watched each wagon opened, missing beneath false plank floors. They found bundles of new tools marked for resale in another county. Coal invoices listed full loads, though half the bins contained only stone dust. Crates labeled track bolts held expensive hunting ammunition ordered under the Harrow estate account. The strongest discovery came near midday. Thomas Bell struck the side of the contractor's locked office wagon and heard paper shift behind the paneling. Daniel pried loose a narrow board. Inside lay letters, receipts, and bank drafts tied with blue cord. Several showed railway money transferred to a private account under the name S. Vane Mercantile. Others carried Nathaniel's copied signature. One envelope had been addressed to the County Transport Board, but never sent. Inside was the original survey approving the direct route through the hunting preserve. The approval bore Nathaniel's father's seal. Nathaniel read the document twice. My father agreed to this route. Daniel pointed to a later page. Then someone submitted a replacement after his death. The replacement diverted the railway around the preserve, increased the project cost by nearly half, and gave Silas Vane authority to purchase additional labor and materials. Edith studied the dates. The first document had been sealed 3 days before the late Lord died. The second had been entered 6 weeks afterward, yet it claimed to carry his personal approval. Vane had not delayed the railway to protect Harrow land. He had lengthened it because every added mile gave him more money to steal. That truth spread through the kitchen without anyone needing to speak it. Men who had blamed the estate looked toward Nathaniel. Tenants who had distrusted the workers looked at the missing wage figures. Shame moved through the room, but courage did not follow immediately. Outside, Vane's guards still held rifles. Inside, no county official had yet agreed to recognize the evidence. By afternoon, the estate steward arrived with the manor's contract register. He was an older man named Mr. Pritchard, precise in dress and pale with unease. He had managed Harrow papers for 27 years. When Edith showed him the copied signature, he examined it through his spectacles. It resembles his lordship's hand. It is not mine, Nathaniel said. Pritchard swallowed. Resemblance may be sufficient until a court decides otherwise. Look at the ink date, Edith said. The steward hesitated. At the lower edge of the false order, beneath Vane's authorization, stood a tiny register number. Edith had seen the same numbering system on the estate statements. Pritchard controlled that register. You entered this document, she said. Pritchard glanced toward the yard, where Vane waited beside the locomotive. One guard watched the kitchen door. I enter what is brought to me. Did Lord Harrow sign it? Pritchard's hand shook against the paper. Vane stepped inside again. Careful. Mr. Pritchard, confusion at your age might cost you the position that keeps your household comfortable. The steward's lips parted, but no answer came. Edith did not press him. She turned the false order over and placed it beside Nathaniel's brass seal. Then we compare the impressions. The estate seal on Vane's order looked proper at first glance. But Nathaniel's true seal carried a narrow crack through the left side of the stag's antler. Damage caused when it fell onto the manor hearth the previous winter. The false order showed no crack. Vane had used an older duplicate. Pritchard stared at the two impressions. His face lost what little color remained. He looked at Vane, then at Nathaniel, then through the doorway toward Daniel Pike, who still moved slowly from hunger, but had returned to work. I was told the duplicate had been destroyed, Pritchard whispered. Vane's voice became soft. You were told many things because you were paid to follow instructions. The steward almost stepped back into silence. Then Amos Reed entered carrying a basket of spoiled pears. He set it on the table so gently that the bruised fruit made no sound. My tenants grew these, he said. By tomorrow, twice this much will be lost. By next week, all of it. We kept your house supplied through lean years. Mr. Pritchard, you know our names. Do not let a forged seal make beggars of us. Pritchard closed his eyes. When he opened them, he pointed toward the contractor's office wagon. There is another register, he said. Mr. Vane keeps it beneath the floor. It records payments he required me to enter under false headings. He said the estate would collapse if I refused. Vane's politeness vanished. He seized the oil lamp from the table and hurled it toward the public ledger. Edith knocked the ledger sideways as the lamp struck the wall. Flame climbed the hanging false order and ran across the dry wood. Workers smothered it with grain sacks while Daniel and Thomas dragged the account books clear. In the confusion, Vane lunged for the blue cord packet. Nathaniel caught his arm. Vane struck him with the silver head of his cane and broke free. Blood opened above Nathaniel's eyebrow. The guards outside raised their rifles, but 50 railway workers moved between them and the kitchen door. None carried a gun. They stood with hammers, shovels, and empty hands. Daniel spoke for them. We will not work for stolen wages. We will not let stolen proof leave this yard. Vane backed toward the locomotive. You are trespassing laborers defying a lawful contractor. No, Edith said, holding the scorched ledger against her chest. You are a thief standing in front of the people whose names you erased. By sunset, the hidden register had been pulled from beneath the wagon floor. It showed every diverted payment, every false purchase, and every bribe made to delay the direct route. But it also revealed something worse. Vane had arranged for the remaining rails to be sold across the county line the next morning. A buyer's freight engine was scheduled to arrive before dawn. If the rails left the valley, The emergency spur could not be built before the harvest spoiled. Nathaniel pressed a cloth to his wounded brow and looked across the survey map at the preserve his family had guarded for generations. The direct line crosses the south hunting ground, the Oak Ridge, and the lower Deer Meadow. It also reaches the junction in time, Edith said. My fathers will restrict permanent development there. Then do not give the railway permanent ownership, she replied. Grant the valley a right of passage. Put the track under a public freight trust. Tenant farms, the estate, and the workers all hold seats. No contractor controls it alone. Daniel looked up. And wages? First claim on freight revenue, Edith said. Food contributions repaid at recorded value. Labor paid before the manor takes profit. Nathaniel studied the room. Every wall of his abandoned kitchen now carried names, figures, and promises written where all could see them. He had inherited land, title, and authority. Yet the people before him had built a fairer system in one day than his estate had managed in years. He reached for the survey. I grant passage through the preserve, he said. Not to Vane, to the valley. No one cheered. They were too tired, and the danger was not finished. Nathaniel signed the emergency grant beneath Edith's ledger entry. Pritchard witnessed it. Daniel marked the first crew shift. Amos pledged tenant wagons and produce. Edith issued fresh meal tokens, each one backed by food already counted and wages now secured against the freight trust. Then a whistle sounded from the eastern pass. 2 short blasts. Daniel's face tightened. That is the buyer's engine. Thomas ran outside and returned moments later. Vane is gone. So are 3 guards and the blasting powder from the grading shed. Edith looked toward the direct route across the preserve. The narrowest passage lay beneath Oak Ridge, where one explosion could bury the grade before a single rail was laid. Silas Vane no longer needed to steal the railway. He only needed to make certain the valley could never finish it. The first blast struck Oak Ridge before the buyer's engine reached the valley. Stone rolled across the unfinished grade. A length of timber jumped from the ground and struck Thomas Bell across the shoulder, throwing him into the ditch. Edith heard men shouting beyond the trees. Then the second fuse began to spit sparks beneath a stack of cut ties. She ran toward it. Daniel Pike caught her by the arm. There may be more powder. There will be no track if that charge goes. She pulled free, seized a wet grain sack from the water wagon, and climbed the broken slope while dirt slid beneath her boots. The fuse burned inside a narrow trench, protected by loose stones. Edith dropped to her knees, pressed the soaked sack over it, and drove both hands into the mud. The flame went dark. A rifle cracked from the ridge. Bark burst from the oak above her head. Nathaniel dragged Edith behind a grating cart as railway workers scattered into cover. No one returned fire. They had hammers, shovels, crowbars, and one purpose: keep the route open long enough to lay the rails. Silas Vane stood on the ridge with 2 guards and the stolen blasting powder at his feet. You have no lawful authority to build here, he called. Move 1 rail, and every man among you becomes a thief. Nathaniel stepped into view with blood still dried along his temple from Vane's cane. He held the signed right of passage grant above his head. This land is mine to open. For now, Vane replied. By tomorrow, the county court will declare you unfit to manage it. He kicked the remaining powder crate toward the drop. Daniel saw what he meant to do. If the crate fell into the cut and exploded, it would bury the narrow grade beneath enough stone to delay construction for weeks. The workers moved together. Thomas, one arm hanging uselessly, drove a wagon downhill to block the ravine. Amos Reed brought tenant teams across the meadow, horses straining against ropes tied to the loose timber. Nathaniel led men around the lower slope, while Daniel climbed straight toward the ridge. Edith stayed near the central cut, organizing what mattered most. She ordered every account book wrapped in oilcloth and placed inside the iron bread oven. She sent 2 tenants to the telegraph office with copies of the emergency grant and the hidden register. Then she moved the cooks, water carriers, and injured men into shifts so that no crew stayed on the grade long enough to collapse from hunger. The kitchen became what the contractor had feared from the beginning. Not a refuge, a command post. Vane's first guard fired into the air to scatter the laborers. The men stopped only long enough to judge where the bullet had gone, then continued hauling ties toward the ridge. Daniel reached the powder crate as Vane raised his cane. The silver head struck Daniel across the jaw. He fell, but his hand closed around the crate rope. Vane kicked him once in the ribs and reached for the fuse. Nathaniel came from the side and drove his shoulder into Vane. Both men rolled down the rocky slope. The powder crate began sliding after them. Edith saw the rope snap. She shouted for the wagon team. Amos whipped the horses forward. The rescue wagon crossed the cut just as the crate dropped. It struck the wagon bed, shattered one sideboard, and spilled powder sacks across wet canvas instead of stone. One guard fled toward the buyer's engine. The other looked at the workers closing around him, lowered his rifle, and stepped away from Vane. Vane rose slowly, mud on his coat, and hatred stripped of courtesy from his face. You think building 2 miles of track will save you? The county owns the junction. I own the freight agreement. No engineer will move a train onto an unlawful spur. A whistle answered him from the valley entrance. The buyer's locomotive had arrived, but it did not slow beside Vane. The engine rolled forward until its wheels stood level with the unfinished railhead. In the cab was the county railway inspector, summoned by the telegraph copies Edith had sent before the explosion. Beside him stood the foreman who had fled with the payroll chest. The chest sat open on the coal tender, empty except for account receipts. The inspector climbed down. Silas Vane, you will come with me. Vane laughed once. On whose complaint? 50 unpaid workers, 12 tenant farms, Lord Harrow, and a telegraph operator who says you tried to stop evidence from reaching the county. The foreman would not meet Vane's eyes. For one dangerous moment, Vane's hand moved toward the fallen rifle. Daniel, still on one knee, placed himself between Vane and the weapon. No more, he said. Vane looked at the men he had starved, the tenants whose harvest he had treated as leverage, and the master whose signature he had copied. Then he lowered his hand. He was taken away without another shot. The valley had won the right to try. It had not yet won the race. For the next 6 days, the unfinished line crossed the preserve yard by yard. Workers laid rail in dawn fog and lantern light. Tenants hauled ties from the store yard and brought produce to the kitchen in place of cash. Edith served 4 meals each day because exhaustion made 3 insufficient. Every bowl was counted. Every hour was entered. Every injury, broken tool, and borrowed horse appeared in the public ledger. Nathaniel worked beside the crew without coat or title. On the 2nd day, he tore both palms lifting rail. On the 3rd, he opened the manor's private coal cellar. On the 4th, he ordered the estate's silver plate pledged against immediate wage notes for the workers. Edith refused to let gratitude become another form of unpaid labor. The silver is security, she told the crew, not charity. Your wages remain wages. By the 7th morning, the last length of rail reached the county junction. The harvest train arrived at noon. Pear crates, wheat sacks, cheese, beans, and preserved meat moved out of the valley before the market closed. The train did not carry only Harrow produce. Every farm whose contribution had been written in the kitchen ledger received space according to need and recorded volume. The poorest tenants loaded first because their crops would spoil fastest. When the final wagon was emptied, Daniel leaned against the kitchen door and watched the train disappear beyond the ridge. We built it, he said. Edith looked at the ledger nailed to the wall. Now we prove who tried to stop it. The county hearing opened 3 weeks later in a courthouse packed beyond the wooden benches. Silas Vane sat behind a polished attorney with 3 contracts, 2 estate seals, and a petition declaring the emergency spur unlawful. His argument was simple enough to frighten every person in the room. The railway workers had entered private land without valid authority. The freight trust had been created during a crisis and therefore lacked proper review. The hidden register was stolen from a contractor's office and could not be trusted. And Nathaniel Harrow, having opened entailed hunting grounds against the restrictions of his father's will, had endangered the estate and should be removed from control of it. The official paper looked stronger than the truth. That was Vane's final weapon. The judge examined the copied authorization and the emergency grant. He listened to Vane's attorney describe Edith as an untrained cook who had encouraged laborers to seize company property. He listened to the claim that hunger, landslide, and public panic had produced unreliable witnesses. Then the judge turned to Nathaniel. Did you possess clear authority to grant permanent railway passage through the preserve? Nathaniel stood. I believed I did. That is not what I asked. The courtroom went quiet. Nathaniel's fathers will contain restrictions no one had fully examined before the construction began. If those restrictions controlled the land, the emergency grant might fail. If the grant failed, the freight trust might fail with it. The workers could be charged for the rails they had laid, and Vane could still claim the contractor's payments. Edith felt the case slipping toward paper. Vane leaned back in his chair. The judge set the emergency grant aside. Until ownership authority is established, I cannot treat this document as decisive. A murmur moved through the room. Then the court clerk announced that the foreman who had carried the payroll chest could not be found. He had agreed to testify. Without him, no one could prove who ordered the money removed. The judge looked toward the county sheriff. Is the witness absent voluntarily? The sheriff hesitated. Silas Vane turned his head just enough for the sheriff to see him. The sheriff's fingers tightened around his hat. He may have left the county, he said. Edith knew a frightened lie when she heard one. The judge reached for Vane's contracts again. Unless stronger evidence is presented, the court may be required to treat these agreements as controlling. That was the moment justice nearly failed. Not because the truth was weak, because fear was still stronger. Edith rose from the witness bench. Your Honor, may the estate steward be called? Vane's attorney objected. Mr. Pritchard has already submitted a written statement. A statement prepared in whose office? Edith asked. The judge allowed the witness. Mr. Pritchard walked slowly to the front. He took the oath, sat, and placed both hands upon his knees to keep them from shaking. Edith showed him the false removal order. Did Lord Harrow sign this? Pritchard looked at Nathaniel, then at Vane. Vane spoke softly enough to sound courteous. Remember your pension, Mr. Pritchard. The steward's voice failed. The judge leaned forward. Answer the question. Pritchard swallowed. I entered the document. That was not the question, Edith said. His eyes dropped to the Harrow seal. For several seconds, he seemed ready to repeat the lie that had protected him for years. Then Thomas Bell shifted on the back bench. His injured arm remained bound against his chest. Beside him sat Daniel, thinner than before the landslide but upright. Pritchard saw them. No, he whispered. Lord Harrow did not sign it. Vane's attorney stood. The witness is confused. I am ashamed, Pritchard said. That is not the same thing. He testified that Vane had ordered him to register copied signatures, alter supply headings, and hide the original route approval. He admitted the contractor threatened to dismiss him and seize the pension owed to his household. His testimony exposed the method of the fraud. But the judge still wanted proof independent of fear and memory. Edith placed the two seal impressions before him. The false order carried a perfect stag antler. Nathaniel's true seal carried a crack. Vane's attorney argued that the duplicate seal was lawfully used before the damage occurred. The judge examined the dates. The false order appeared to have been entered 2 months before the seal cracked. Once again, Vane seemed protected. Then Edith opened the kitchen ledger. She turned to the first page created after the landslide. At the top stood the station stamp, she had used on the meal tokens. Beneath it was the date. She placed one of Vane's false invoices beside it. Both had been stamped with the same black railway ink supplied to the Valley Station only after the spring shipment. The invoice claimed to have been issued the previous winter. Vane had created it months later and dated it backward. The judge examined the ink, then called the station telegraph operator, who confirmed the shipment date from the county freight book. A banker testified that Vane's private mercantile account received matching sums within days of each false invoice. Daniel produced the crew book, showing no corresponding wages. The lie began to break one line at a time. Then the sheriff stood. His face was gray. The missing foreman did not leave the county, he said. Vane turned toward him. The sheriff almost sat down. Nathaniel's wounded brow had healed, but the scar remained visible beneath the courthouse light. The sheriff looked at it, then at Edith, then toward the workers filling the rear benches. I held him overnight at Mr. Vane's request, he continued. He is in the lower jail. The judge ordered the foreman brought up. When the man entered, he carried the payroll chest receipts. They showed that Vane had withdrawn the workers' money, transferred most of it to his private account, and sent the empty chest away to make the crew believe payment had never arrived. The foreman's testimony completed what the ink, ledgers, seals, and bank drafts had already begun. Silas Vane lost control slowly. First, the judge rejected the false removal order. Then the payroll contract. Then the altered route. Finally, the court recognized the original survey approved by Nathaniel's father. That approval had been valid before the will restrictions took effect. The direct railway corridor had already been granted. Nathaniel's emergency action had not opened forbidden land. It had completed an agreement Vane had hidden. The ruling ordered Vane's property seized to repay worker wages, tenant-produced contributions, missing railway funds, and damage caused by the sabotage. The sheriff was removed pending a county inquiry. Pritchard kept no authority over estate records, but the court credited his testimony and protected the pension Vane had used to silence him. Most important, the freight spur was placed under the Valley Trust. The manor received one seat. The workers received one. The tenant farms received one. No single owner could close the line, divert its income, or starve its laborers into obedience. When the judge struck the bench, no one cheered at first. The workers looked at Edith. The tenants looked at the workers. Nathaniel looked at the old family seal lying beside the kitchen ledger. Then Daniel Pike stood. He removed his meal token from his coat pocket and placed it on the rail before the judge. That paper fed us when his contracts did not, he said. One by one, others placed their tokens beside his. The small cardboard squares covered the polished wood. They were stained by grease, flour, rain, and working hands. And for once, the court understood exactly what they were worth. The first freight payment reached the kitchen before winter. Edith placed the coins on the old preparation table and counted them beneath the ledger where every promise had been written. Worker wages came first. Then the tenant credits for flour, beans, pork, apples, horses, and wagon time. The manor received nothing until every labor token had been redeemed. Daniel Pike stood at the end of the line with his first full wage packet in both hands. He did not open it. For several moments, he only held it, as though money honestly earned might still be taken back if he trusted it too quickly. Edith noticed but said nothing. Some fears did not leave when a judge struck a bench. They left one ordinary day at a time. The Valley Trust repaired the direct spur before the first frost. Instead of fencing the railway away from the farms, it built 3 loading platforms along the route. Small growers no longer had to haul produce to the Harrow estate before reaching market. Freight space was posted publicly each week, with the poorest farms given priority whenever weather threatened their crops. Nathaniel surrendered the old hunting lodge for use as a workers' rest house. He kept one room for estate records, but the key hung in the public office where any trustee could request it. No seal could be used without 2 witnesses. No payment could be entered without a second copy posted in the kitchen. Mr. Pritchard returned once. He stood outside the door for several minutes before Edith invited him in. He no longer wore the steward's coat. Age seemed to have reached him all at once. "I came to return something," he said. From his pocket, he placed the duplicate Harrow seal on the table. Nathaniel looked at it but did not touch it. Pritchard lowered his eyes. "I should have destroyed it years ago." "You should have spoken years ago," Nathaniel replied. "Yes, my lord." Nathaniel glanced toward the ledger wall, then toward the railway workers eating supper at the long tables. "Not my lord," he said. "Not here." Pritchard nodded once and left the seal behind. Edith melted it in the kitchen fire. She did not celebrate when the stag's perfect antler disappeared into shapeless metal. She only watched until no one could ever press that line of paper again. Daniel became the first elected worker trustee. Amos Reed represented the tenant farms. Nathaniel held the estate seat, though he learned quickly that a title did not carry more weight than a vote. Their meetings were rarely peaceful. Workers argued for higher wages. Tenants demanded lower freight rates. Nathaniel worried that repairs would consume reserves. Edith sat at the table with the accounts between them and refused to let any man speak of sacrifice without naming who would bear it. When the trust earned a surplus, half went into rail maintenance. 1/4 funded emergency wages. The rest created a valley storehouse for seed, preserved food, and coal. The abandoned kitchen remained the center of it all. Its chimney was straightened. The bread oven was rebuilt. New shelves replaced the rotten ones, though Edith kept the original preparation table with its knife marks and scorched stains. Above it hung the first public ledger, protected beneath glass. Beside it were several of the old meal tokens from the courthouse. The most worn token belonged to Daniel. He had tried to redeem it with the others. Edith refused. "You earned its value already," she told him. "Then why keep it?" "So no one forgets what a promise looks like before it becomes money." Through that first winter, Daniel still sat nearest the kitchen door. Whenever a locomotive whistle sounded unexpectedly, his shoulders tightened. Once, when a freight inspector entered wearing a dark coat like Silas Vane's, Daniel stood so quickly his chair fell backward. No one laughed. Edith righted the chair and set a bowl of stew in front of him. "The wages are in the office," she said. "The books are on the wall. The keys are where all can see them." Daniel looked around the room. Nothing was hidden. He sat down again. By spring, he no longer chose the chair nearest the door. Nathaniel changed more slowly. He continued walking the old hunting grounds at dawn, though deer now crossed between rail fences and freight sheds. For months, he watched every train as if it carried away some portion of his inheritance. Then the second harvest came. The valley shipped twice the produce lost in the landslide year. Tenant debts fell. Railway wages were paid on schedule. A widowed farmer bought back the team she had sold during the crisis. 3 workers rented cottages near the line instead of sleeping in camp tents. The manor accounts, once dependent on private hunting leases, grew stronger through the shared freight revenue. Nathaniel stood beside Edith on the platform as the harvest train pulled away. "My father believed opening this land would diminish us," he said. Edith watched tenant names painted on crates disappearing toward the pass. "It did." Nathaniel looked at her. "It diminished the part that should have been smaller." For the first time, he smiled without caution. Years passed, and the kitchen gained more chairs. Railway crews stopped there before taking difficult grades through the mountains. Farmers left soup simmering for travelers delayed by snow. Anyone who worked for the Valley Trust could inspect the accounts, ask a question, or challenge an entry without losing employment. Edith trained 2 former dining car attendants to manage the canteen. Daniel taught younger railway workers how to read wage statements and count supply wagons before signing a receipt. Amos helped neighboring valleys establish freight cooperatives of their own. Nathaniel never married Edith, and she never required rescue through his name or estate. Their loyalty took another form. When age made long meetings difficult, he walked from the manor to the kitchen each Thursday and brought the trust papers himself. Edith met him at the door with tea. They argued over numbers, complained about weather, and watched trains cross land his family had once kept empty for sport. The valley remembered Silas Vane only through the rules created to prevent another man from becoming him. No secret seal. No private ledger. No unpaid labor disguised as necessity. No railway serving one estate while the farms beyond it failed. Edith's last winter was gentle. She sat beside the stove beneath Samuel's brass timetable watch, listening to a freight train take the curve toward the junction. Daniel, gray-haired now, brought her the weekly wage register. "Paid in full," he said. "Provision accounts?" "Paid." "Maintenance reserve?" "Funded." "And the poorest farms?" "Loaded first." Edith closed the book. Outside, the railway whistle crossed the valley where the landslide had once cut every family off from market. Years earlier, that sound had warned her that armed men were returning to steal what remained. Now it meant pears, wheat, wages, letters, medicine, and honest work moving through an open passage. The abandoned kitchen door stood wide. No guard watched it. No hungry worker waited outside for permission to enter. And above the table, beneath the first scorched ledger, one sentence had been carved into the wall. No promise stands unless everyone can see it. If Edith Shaw's story reminded you that fair work begins with an honest account, write "Keep the Ledger Open" in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people who kept a whole community from being forgotten.